basically the purpose of this presentation and discussion is feedback that despite an awful lot of media communication that's going on, we've had a number of get-togethers, and out of the get-togethers has come, gee, I didn't know that. A whole lot I didn't know. And I know people who don't know. And we've concluded that it would really be good to make general updates for the public, and frankly for a number of people on our team who aren't involved in every aspect of the project, to bring them up to speed and get the community more engaged. So that's the purpose of this. And what we'll do tonight is give you not just where we are, but where we've been. I think it's very important that everybody understand what the initial objectives were and what the journey has been and where we plan to go and where we have gotten in the process. And if you look across the street, you see what amounts to a big flat area with a little pavilion up on top and a pergola up front, and it really doesn't look like an awful lot of effort. Suffice it to say, it's been a little more than meets the eye. So let me just walk through it. Overall agenda, just a general background on where it was, how we organized the initiative itself, both from the project and the fundraising side, and what we've gone through in terms of the regulatory aspects of this, which are critically important. Environmental aspects, both in terms of the contaminated land and soil, and water, as well as the wetlands issue. The site has a remarkable amount of wetlands on it, particularly up front near 117. And then walk through where we've gone in terms of the physical project, the demolition and remediation, and what we call site preparation, which is basically getting to where we have gotten to a large degree. That's preparing the site for actually building what will ultimately be the vision of the common on it. What we're doing in terms of communication, that's a kind of two-way street. We'll tell you what we're doing, and I think we'd like to hear what you think we ought to be doing, or whether it's working, or what you would suggest we might add to that. And then where we are with fundraising and near-term plans. And then I have a slideshow, basically 6 or 7 minutes long, that gives you a perspective on pretty much everything that's gone on in the last 4 years. And actually, this project in total has been going on, believe it or not, for 7 years, 3 years before the trust got involved. So let me move on. Background, after the town turned it in 2011, the trust bought it, and bought it with mass development loans. Mass development is just about the only outfit that has brownfield loans. In other words, they will loan money to people who are in one form or another developing contaminated land, brownfields, into something that is useful, purposeful, and benefits the community or the economy of the community. The primary objectives were let's straighten out the environmental aspects. Let's turn the brownfield into something that is no longer contaminated and useful. But at the same time, the trust purchased it, and the trust certainly doesn't want to make money on this, but it doesn't want to lose money. It's not a big organization. You wonder why things have suddenly taken off in the last year, basically, with our fundraising. Two primary reasons. One is we spent a great deal of time looking at all sorts of alternatives for the development of this land. We looked at single-family residences, we looked at even 40Bs, we looked at compact zoning, we looked at a number of things. No matter what we did, frankly, it didn't work. As I said, one of the biggest issues is the amount of wetlands on the land. Although up and back, where it rises, there are less wetlands, but it's not particularly appropriate for any kind of development, nor did we feel it would be appropriate to do so. We also spent an awful lot of time working to get grant money from the EPA. EPA gives out grant money for brownfield redevelopment. We tried twice, very hard, and both times we were not given the grant, and the message from the EPA was, you folks are the second richest town in central Massachusetts, and in terms of needs elsewhere in the Commonwealth, there are far greater needs elsewhere. And in both cases, the grants went to gateway communities, most recently Bedford and Springfield in 2013. In organizing the initiative, that really was practical would be, we pulled together a team, fairly large group meetings, started off with just generally getting concepts of how people saw the thing coming together. That coalesced more and more, so by the time we got through our 4th meeting in September of 2014, we had a pretty good idea of what the key elements of the project would be, and frankly, those key elements would be reflected in the organization. The organization looks like that, and the reason it's illustrated that way is the incredible connectivity among the elements of the organization. We have a steering committee in the middle that's responsible for basically coordinating the elements of the organization, but we have 7 individual elements and groups. The communications team on the top, fundraising, of course, it's the most aggressive fundraising effort that the town has ever seen on a private basis, in terms of the percentage of private funding going into the project. Construction, and that's construction and remediation. Of course, the finance. The charrette, you will go into in a bit. We really wanted to engage the community and come up with a design that was reflective of the widest range of stakeholders that we could in the community. We'll talk about that a little more. And then surrounding all of this, the most critical thing is getting community engagement and support. Once we got our organization together and figured out where we should go conceptually, clearly we had to have a plan. We had to figure out, once we had a general idea of where we were going, what we needed to do in terms of developing the concept for the common and refining that to something that was buildable. We simultaneously had to run a substantial amount of regulatory management, and that was basically 3 areas. One was, of course, the investigation, remediation of contaminated soil and groundwater, but we also had to deal with wetlands, and we also had to deal with more normal administrative aspects of doing anything in a community like this, building permits, site plans, etc. Then the site development, out of all of that, meaning actually building out the site once we've gotten the contamination taken care of in site, and the site itself prepared to take its ultimate development, and then finally the fundraising. The overarching plan is a very, very large plan, very carefully put together. It's had a number of revisions. It's a living plan. It's now on Rev 4. You can't read that. I certainly can't read that in this distance. But that's basically all of the elements of the plan. And attached to that, each individual element has a plan of its own, which is updated. And some of them, I'm delighted to say, have accomplished their objectives and now have been archived for posterity. So we had a plan. You saw, no doubt, the end of year before last, beginning of last year, on a charrette process. We brought together 25 people with about 7 support people. We came up with a developed set of concepts. We brought those out to the public. The public came back with some minor 900 comments, right? 900 comments. To a large degree, they were pretty easy to group. We incorporated them, and we came up with another charrette workshop and integrated all of the comments to the degree that we could into a single concept. And then that concept was put together and presented in the unveiling at the International March 27th this year. Let me see if I can get our technical operation to work this. I'm not sure everybody has seen this. It's up on the web. This was the video presentation that Neoscape did for us for the unveiling. That basically reflected the concept coming out of the charrette. So we came up with that, the concept, we presented the concept, and then in order to actually build it, we had to go through detailed engineering. And Ducharme and Dillis put together the detailed engineering for us, which was substantially more complicated than it would appear from here. We had to have drainage plans, we had to have site reviews. A great deal of engineering went into it. Frankly, a lot of engineering went into it to make the construction easier and less expensive. It could have been a very straightforward, very expensive process had they not put a lot of thought into how to do it. Regulatory management, wetlands, I mentioned. We had to go through a whole series of interfaces with Conservation Commission. Right up front, we had to come up with a complete, what's referred to as an ANRAD, it's an abbreviated notice of resource area delineation. And that basically covers all the natural resources on the site. Rare species, wetlands, et cetera, et cetera. That had a lot of drawings and 34 pages. They issued a response to that, basically endorsed it. We're absolutely delighted. The people who put together our documents had absolutely no problem with the regulatory authorities. They came back quite happy and in agreement. Same thing with the wetlands when we did the demolition. And then finally, when we did the construction, an enormous amount of engineering calculation went into that. Our notice of intent, biggest notice of intent we've ever seen, 110 pages. But again, well enough done so it got completely turned around and endorsed very quickly. And then the usual site and building permitting, the demolition permits. In the case of 715, that took 9 months. Site plan review, again, great development of the permit applications, and consequently relatively few comments and some practically, some very good suggestions. And then as we started towards demolition, we discovered that there's asbestos in everything. Things such as the tile and the floors have been put in the 50s, and they were strengthened with asbestos. The glue on the ceiling tiles was asbestos to strengthen them. Even the glazing in the windows was asbestos, so they all had to be removed, packaged, and shipped to a location in Ohio. Investigation and remediation, we're basically through it now. We're at the point of monitoring, but we had to go through the phase 1, which was done actually by the Smith Trust in 2006. That's just basically a due diligence. That's a high level, let's take a look, does it look like we have some problems here? And it's pretty quickly identified there was a need to get more serious and in-depth by digging holes. Phase 2 was an intrusive investigation. That ended up with a great deal of drilling, boring of wells, sampling of soil, groundwater, surface water, silt, etc. And that went through actually 3 revisions. Ultimately, as you can see there, substantially over 1,500 pages with lots of discussion with DEP. But in the end, they were very happy with it, with the final comprehensive site report. And that was done July 10th of 2015. So that's when we could start seriously going into the actual physical remediation, which is one of the reasons that this was delayed so far. And phase 3 and 4 are the actual design of the remediation. What has to be taken out of the ground, what has to be covered and designated, etc. And that came together, and that was done in October, and we went off like a shot thereafter. So we were all set. We had a pretty good idea of what we needed to do, but that was what we needed to do. So we are now finished with that, and we are at the point now of monitoring. Just to give you an idea of what that entailed, right? This is the aggregate investigations that went on with those individual investigations and reports. So we have 110 holes out there, not mentioning the 27 wells, water monitoring wells, that most of which are still out there. And those actually are not just on the site, they're across the street, they're downriver. Alice knows about that, right, Alice? And we also, of course, check the private wells, and that's an ongoing effort. But and natural attenuation wells, we've gotten very, very low on those. So once we got through that, then we had to figure out what we were going to do to actually build this thing. And this is basically the elements of the project management plan for construction. These are all of the tasks. The ones on the left are basically building out the civil infrastructure, doing all the drainage, all the filling, the road work, the parking lot, and ultimately at the beginning of the spring we'll get to the point of putting in loam and grass. On the right are all the physical elements beyond that, which, assuming that we have the appropriate funding to do it next year, we'll go ahead and start building those out. The one thing that I think is very, very impressive about this is the number of people who have volunteered to either lead or be a very important part or completely do a number of these elements. I can get into that a little bit later, but the amount of in-kind support that we've gotten by very experienced people with amazing resources, heavy equipment, all sorts of fill, and frankly a lot of expertise and advice in doing this, which is, I've never done a project with volunteers before of this size. It's $1.5 million project, and without volunteers, doing it with a general contractor, it would have been twice that. So I think we've, it's just been, it's been great to have. The demolition, which was the first activity, was a very interesting experience. We thought we were demolishing buildings, and we were discovering tanks that we were not aware of. Nobody was aware of them. We thought all the tanks had been pulled, all of those investigations had been done, and that wasn't the case. I'll show you, we found 3 more tanks. We recycled everything. Everything went back up to Devon's recycling. The organic material, which is basically wood, 187 tons of that, over 300 tons of concrete, and then an enormous amount of metal. We pulled out all the I-beams and they went over to Reisner in Clinton. And then we had some tanks that went to Reisner too after they'd been carefully cleaned. And then I think our greatest success was we finally got Verizon and National Grid to work together to remove a telephone pole. It was just, it took 10 people and 4 trucks, but we made it happen. Remediation basically went ahead once we had the phase 4 requirements from our licensed site professional. We identified the truckers, the disposal facilities, 2 primary types of contamination. One was petroleum, of which there was a great deal, and then the other was lead, and they had to be disposed separately. And then as we excavated the areas in which the wells and the testing told us we had substantial contamination, we had to continually test to make sure that we'd gotten it all. And frankly, with petroleum, we hadn't gotten it all. And we had to dig again to get to the point where we were no longer detecting that level. So bottom line, 227 tons of soil went off to Maine, and 23 tons of lead went to, and I have to do this carefully, was transshipped through New Jersey. Everybody kids about when you want to get waste, you send it to New Jersey. No, it was the truckers transshipped it to an appropriate disposal site. Lead is continued, well, considering the level of contamination, it was much more serious than petroleum. Petroleum basically is taken care of by, ironically, turning it back into pavement. And then finally, we had to cover everything that the contamination had been detected with geotextiles, so that we would always know that there had been contamination detected in those areas. Site preparation.
What is geotextile?
Geotextile is, let's see, it's sort of like silk fence. It's very similar to silk fence, except it's not woven. It's pressed together. Pretty strong stuff. It's amazingly strong stuff.
So if you ever dug down in there, you'd bump into it?
Yeah.
That's the theory?
And in the end, when all of this is finished, there will be what's called an AUL, which will be registered with the land. That's an activity and use limitation document, which will actually lay out exactly where this stuff was, so that you know, it's sort of like DigSafe. You need to know where it is, and that will be part of the outcome of all of this. Site preparation is all the activity that you saw going on with all the heavy equipment and trucks coming in the last 3 months. We did the rough grading. We put in a staggering amount, 1,500 cubic yards of crushed concrete and gravel in the driveways. I think I can say with certainty that the base for the road going into the common is better than 117. So. Some people say I'm not saying it. But all kidding aside, it's been very well done. It was done very professionally. We put in a great deal of culvert. One of the things we had to do was Great Brook runs right smack through the center of the lower section of the common, and it ran through a 36-inch culvert, and there was concern that in a 100-year flood it would overtop the 36-inch culvert. And rather than open it all up and completely redo all that culvert work, we reached agreement with the Conservation Commission using a very innovative approach that Ducharme and Dulles suggested, that we would put a parallel culvert above the 36-inch culvert, so that it ever did overtop the 36-inch culvert, it would go through this long culvert and not do any damage at all, and not back up to the upstream properties. So we put in 220 feet of culvert, which is not a small job in itself. And then, much to our disgruntlement, we discovered that the culvert, the 36-inch culvert we depended on, and over which we were going to put the road, was completely corroded. We were going to do a quick check. We pulled in excavators, uncovered it to take a look at it, and in good conscience could not continue. We just ripped it all out and started over again. We put in a total of almost 8,000 cubic yards of fill, which is why it looks nice and reasonably flat out there and looks much more like a cone than it did before. And that was very carefully graded to get the runoff to come down the way it needed to and pass through those cones. One thing that we changed from the original plans, once we started doing the grading of the parking lot, we saw 2 huge iconic maple trees on the east end of it, and just didn't have the heart to cut those trees down, so we actually moved the parking lot. And at the end of the parking lot, you see those 2 huge maples, which we're very happy about. And then, as I mentioned, we had that wonderful experience with Verizon International Group. In terms of site development per se, going beyond the site preparation, the Boy Scouts in Troop 1, Dan Gaffney's son Jack, this was his Eagle Scout project, got a whole team together and with the support of Doug Story, being our expert on the scene, built the upper pavilion, which was used for Santa Claus during the tree. And then very recently, Rich Pelletier donated pergola, and actually was down there constructing it with us. So those are the two things that you see. In terms of future work, the next thing you'll see is going to be the loam. We need to get loam in there fairly quickly and seed it. Not just to make it look pretty, but to make sure that we stabilize the site and eliminate potential erosion in the future. Communications. You want to talk for a second about it?
Sure.
Put you on the spot, but this is
No,
the lady
not
who
at all.
does it.
Hi, I think I know most everyone. Meg O'Leary, I'm the co-chair with Bob. On the communications front, communication is something that, it's a tricky thing. Sometimes people say, you're reaching out to us too much. Other people say, someone said, where's the common going to be? So, you never know if you're like hitting the right cadence. But we are trying to be as transparent as possible, keep people up to date. I think if you read the Bolton Independent, there's almost something in there almost every week, whether it's an event that we're going to have or an article about our progress. We do keep a blog on boltontowncommon.org that we try to update regularly with information about the project. Facebook is got about almost 450 people following it on Facebook. We seem to get great engagement there. So anytime you put anything on the blog or elsewhere, we also promote it through Facebook. And oh, the next page actually. And we also, hopefully you're getting email updates and also through the Bolton Conservation Trust newsletter and just regular press updates. But the other thing that we're doing is neighborhood get-togethers. I think we've had about 5 so far. So different folks in different neighborhoods have offered to do get-togethers, and it's been a terrific way for us to just get the word out about these events. So we provide the cocktails and the food, and we just ask you to invite your neighbors, and we keep the program maybe 10-15 minutes. It's not really quite this in-depth, but it's just a time to sort of chat about things, learn more about the project, and hopefully enjoy your neighbors at the same time.
And getting the community together
Getting the,
before
that's
we
right,
build
that's
the
right,
common.
that's right. Which I think leads us to events, right?
Right.
The next one? Oh, fundraising, my favorite topic.
Oh, yes.
So on the fundraising front, if you, and many of you have been in this project for some time, the budget was closer to 1.8 million when we started. There's been this unbelievable outpouring of in-kind support, expertise, but the reality is 1.47 million remains the number. Bert and Bob and I sit around a table, and I try to say, well, can we get rid of this? I'm trying to get rid of everything, construction, remediation, but they tell me we can't get rid of it.
No.
So the number is 1.47 million. We're at about 912,000 from 375 unique donors. That includes about 195 people who've actually given gifts to the Common. And then the 375 is people who've actually come to the auction that Joe put together a couple of years ago, and other kinds of donations. So we're really pleased with the fundraising, but I should also mention we have applied for grants. We've talked to foundations for Central Massachusetts. We have met with Representative Kate Hogan. We've met with Congresswoman Tsongas. There is seemingly no public money for Bolton. And so we're just not a town with demographics that meet the various asks of these grants. And of course, there is no federal funding or even state funding for projects like this right now. The kind of grant, for example, that came when this great work was done for the library, those programs are gone. So the reality is we're going to keep applying for these. But the reality is that we expect this money to come from private donors. In terms of activities and events, I mentioned the great auction. Hopefully some of you, many of you were at the unveiling at the International. The Bolton 5K and Family Festival was awesome. Deb Kotlars and the Bolton Rally Group graciously let us hold the Bolton Common this year, and we raised close to $40,000. It was a great community event. But we're also trying to do things like the Christmas tree and menorah lighting, where we did not charge anything. And we actually think there were about 700 people came to that event, which was great. We're trying to give people a taste of what the Common is all about, which is about sort of coming together and through various donations of multiple people. We did that for virtually no money. But there's a ways to go in terms of more fundraising to be done. There's naming opportunities for various components. There's actually some brochures up here with that. Helene Demmer is helping us run a brick campaign to pave the way to the Common. You'll be getting a postcard soon about that. And then we were hoping to have, not hoping, we are going to have, we haven't started the planning, but we do have the date for an auction on May 15th at the winery. So we want to try to recreate that great event again. We're just, so far have the date and nothing else, but mark your calendar. We're going to make sure it's great. And then, of course, there's been a number of in-kind contribution, everyone from the International to Doug Story, Neoscape, with the folks who created that video. The 3D videos like that are $80,000, $90,000. And the founder happens to come from Bolton. His mom was the librarian here in his childhood. He donated that video. So there's too many people to mention here, but there were people have been so great in giving, and so we're really pleased by the way that the town is rallied together. I think that's it for me. I'll let you.
Thanks.
No, that's my question.
You said it well. Yes?
Question, I wasn't able to attend the Christmas menorah lighting. You had 700 people. How'd the parking go?
Actually, pretty well.
Okay. Because that's always been a question we wondered.
Oh, well, it was, first of all, Trinity Church provided their lot, which is huge.
Memorial
And
Field.
Memorial Field. And I think one of the big things was we had tremendous cooperation from the fire department and police. Police managed traffic and people very, very well. And the fire department lit the whole place. If you saw that photograph on the front of the Bolton Independent, the sky was lit by Bolton Fire Department.
So it was a good proof of concept that we actually can have a town event there.
Yes.
And
We
still.
did get some great feedback. Got some great feedback that maybe the next time, maybe we'll get some shuttles going. Maybe they'll be similar to the Bolton Fair with the high school and maybe the senior center to have shuttles going.
Yeah, no, that's.
We've got some great feedback from people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention also, that was such a great example of the community coming together. Everything from the Girl Scouts selling the s'mores to there were some moms who made some ornaments, and they were selling the ornaments $3 a piece. They just wrote us a check for $1,700 selling Christmas ornaments. So while it really was an unbelievable get together, and people just sort of rallying, people who weren't involved in this project at all, suddenly coming forward and sort of saying we want to help. So we're hoping for, in addition to what we have planned, more of that to come.
You had the football team who managed to, win the championship the week before and cause a rescheduling and be there as,
Right, to
as
the,
guest stars and
Exactly.
all of that.
I think it's funny because I feel like it was obviously the first event we had at the Common, and what everybody, not what a lot of people knew, was it actually was the first time we actually could have an event at the Common because the land was actually remediated. So it was a great sort of christening of the land, while it's still, a dirt pile. I hope to do it again when it's actually green come the spring, summer. So.
And we expect Neshoba, of course, to be at the Super Bowl again.
On a different night for one of our events.
Yes, right. We'll coordinate better next time. But as I said, the near-term plans are, we'll get on, we'll build out to the extent that we can in the events. What I wanted to do was just quickly run you through a photographic just the history of the whole thing in photographs, as it originally looked. From both directions. What it looked like inside. It looked out back. More of what it looked like out back. More of what it looked like out back. This is Rob Held, his soul rest in peace, who is very, very active in this. His tractor always is ready. And this is the crew emptying the trailers and filling dumpsters and building trails and maintaining the general area throughout. And more maintenance. And that's one of the things that is critically important. If you're going to do a site like this, you need to maintain the site as you build. And this is our stellar team. More maintenance. This was the point at which we had the windows taken out as a result of the asbestos abatement. Again, we were absolutely amazed. 1% asbestos in the glazing. We shipped that out, I don't know how many pounds. This is the 723. Just before we demolished it, the fire department had never had any experience in a roof entry, and it was a great opportunity for them to go try it out on a non-burning house. We also, my son was part of that, and he brought the Amherst, UMass Amherst Student Fire Department out here, and they had never done it, so they trained them both. This is the demolition of the garage itself, 715. What was left before it was shipped out to be recycled. 723. Sad to see them go, but we'll replace them, we'll be better. That was our first exciting discovery. That was a tank that shouldn't have been there. And there's another tank that shouldn't have been there. And that one was a fairly serious problem, but the one beside it was very serious. And we actually had to do a lot of sampling. We had to get permission to move forward. We had to file an immediate report with the state. And this was the third one, which frankly looked like a submarine.
Yeah.
6 feet in diameter, 24 feet long. And somebody had, quote, overlooked it. So we were quite surprised. This is our little celebration for the demolition and the hats that those who had contributed to the demolition got. This is the demolition team. And that was after the whole thing was completed. This was the beginning of the charrette. This was the first charrette workshop. There were 25 people from every walk of life working hard. There's Kia telling Dan what he ought to be doing. The viewing after the first charrette, where we gathered lots and lots of comments. That Liz Shepke spent a great deal of time consolidating on the spreadsheet. The second charrette, where we all finally agreed on the approach that should be taken. Had an absolutely fantastic graphic artist who, in real time, developed 3D models of what we were doing so we could look at it from the ground, look at it from any direction. That's the charrette team. This is the beginning, taking down the trees as we started working up towards the upper pavilion and sledding slope. These are the wonderful little benches that the Cub Scouts made by hand. Steve Schneider had access to.
From trees, right? From trees that they
From
cut
trees,
down.
yeah.
Bob, where are those benches going to be?
Right now, they're going to be beside the parking lot for the time being. They haven't figured out exactly where they're going to be. But they're being used, let me tell you. This was the Eagle Scout project. This was the upper pavilion looking down. At that point, some of the grading had been done, and you could at least climb up there. This is beginning to fill coming in. This is finally, that was 1,500 cubic yards of fill to get up to the pavilion. I don't know how many truckloads. This is taking down the trees and the famous telephone pole off to the left there to bring in the access for the parking lot. We really didn't want to have the access go right down the center of the common, so it was shifted over. That's how we started. We started pretty early on a lot of occasions. And this is the excavation of the lead, the first excavation. Interestingly enough, we didn't find any of the things people predicted, colors and things like that. We just found dirty earth, more grading, more dirty earth. This was petroleum. And this is a little rock we found. And put back on my head. We did not send that to either New Jersey or more filling. And that's basically what they did. They just backed these 18-wheelers up and dumped them and then moved on. And we had to put all the contaminated soil in plastic and then cover it so that there wasn't any erosion. Here's the covering team. That was lead. That was lead also. And eventually, we did take out a lot of contaminated soil up in where the parking lot is now. This is, Andrew, this is, you asked about the,
He's done.
this is the first layer of that in the lead area. This is taking out, we had to take out all of the stumps. When we cut trees, we were putting the access on top of it. Stumps eventually decompose, roads sink, and so our decision was we'd take out every stump, which we did. And that was, all of that was done with volunteer equipment and labor, which was pretty impressive. And there we are filling where that whole stump area was. This is, as Dan calls him, the slave. This is Jack Gatlin, finishing his Eagle Scout project. He didn't know we'd have to, do all the civil work as well. This is Greg Wilson, our surveyor, who was absolutely fantastic. Surveyors have an unenviable job of doing all the surveys for all the civil work, putting up all sorts of stakes, and then having them run over by bulldozers, and then doing it all over again for the next layer. This is what it took to pull one telephone pole down. And there they are. And there it's gone. This was the 36-inch culvert that we uncovered to make sure it was in good condition before we put the road over it. It wasn't. There it is. And here's a more graphic example. That's what it looked like when we pulled it out. It was just absolutely hopeless. So what we had to do was pull the whole thing out. We had to put a gravel bed in. We had to cut off. In the middle of all of this, and these are in sequence, we realized that we now had to excavate more contaminated petroleum. So we ended up taking out twice as much as we had originally. And that's the kind of stuff we had to dig through to get at it. This is Mark Milliken, one of the contractors who worked with us, cutting the pipe that was still good. And here they are lowering in the new culvert, and that's double-walled culvert. And it's the only thing really that you can put under a road. And it all has to be backfilled with crushed gravel. This is our unicorn. This is the way they carried the smaller, the 18-inch culvert through. And that's putting the 18-inch culvert in. And incidentally, all that had to be surveyed to a quarter of an inch in order to get the slopes right over a 220-foot run. Yeah, and this is why the culvert, the existing culvert, didn't work. That's what was jammed up inside it, and it was all the concrete forms that had been used to build the culvert in the first place, which had fallen out of the top and jammed up. This is putting the road in, and you can see it's pretty serious. It's the first foot of very heavy gravel. Oh, this is loading the trucks with petroleum contaminated earth to go off to Maine. The interesting trick here, let me look at it. The interesting trick here was to do excavation, filling, grading, surveying, and at the same time do the remediation in parallel with that. So we had 5 trucks at a time, some occasions. This is more of the cover to identify the locations where contamination had been detected. This is the road moving up as we continue to fill it. And you can see it's down about 2 feet, and we fill that whole area, get a very, very solid substrate, so the road is really, really solid. Same thing. Road at the base, the substrate finished. This is more of the filling over the contaminated area with this separation. The final burying of the bypass culvert. And again, this was a combination of excavation, filling, and then very carefully surveying it so that it went in exactly where it was supposed to. This is its nose sticking out. And you can see the culvert, the main culvert's below it, and it now has a screen over it to keep things from going in. And the culvert above it, which is the bypass, I suspect it will never be used. I think once the culvert got cleaned, it was fine. That was when we were rushing against weather. And we worked fairly late into the night. This is, oh yes, the drainage in the road required that we put in very large concrete catch basins. So those went in under the road. And this is the base for the Christmas tree. My son has volunteered to weld that whole thing up, which he did with, again, donated material. Here's the team in the rain, bringing the tree over. There it is, the picture you've all seen. It's Santa Claus. He saw over 200 kids and had a conversation with every kid and asked them to do a task for their parents in order to have a successful Christmas. This is Rick Pelletier deep in his project. And that's what it looks like now. So that's it.